Thank you so much, Dr. Chinere. Dr. Abdul, I saw you taking notes, and I really like the work that you do over at CARE. On your website, it says we are focused on reducing poverty and taking care of the vulnerable. So I really want to hear your thoughts on this. But Doctor, I don't want to throw something in here. I admit to everyone, I have a decentralization bias, right? I just want to give you a quick example when you talk about it, because I know there's been a lot of focus on the federal. With what's been happening with fuel prices, we were talking to our correspondents in different parts of the country. Kaduna State has disbursed CNG buses to try to help residents deal with the fuel prices. River State has not, right? So in terms of your review on how these reforms have impacted the vulnerable, are you looking at this at the state level, or are you taking this at the federal level? Do share your thoughts, please, on the reforms, the why, and how they've impacted folks.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Is this here? Yeah. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Agora, for inviting us to be part of this conversation. And this is quite an interesting one. And I appreciate the context that has been established by the teacher and the Deputy Central Bank Governor. I think this is quite illuminating for a lot of people, but it's a conversation that we are all very much conversant with. I think my take on this discussion, I'll try not to get to respond to some of those issues, but to appreciate that, one, I don't think an average Nigerian or anyone is questioning the economics of this reform per se. But I think what we question is the politics and the social cost of the reform. The economic logic established, it makes sense to a number of people, and anyone who has followed the economic trajectory of this country in the last 3 years. We appreciate this. Then secondly, for a country that has been perpetually under reform, the language of necessity of the reform does not make any difference. Nigeria has been under reform since 1986. We went through structural adjustment program, and the language has always been there is no alternative to it. Anyone who followed Nigeria's economic trajectory, you will appreciate that. In 86, the structural 85, 86, the structural adjustment debate was massive. The discourse on foreign exchange, what we call the second-tier foreign exchange program, was massive. The concern for some of us is that, and I'm not a military apologist, but I've just have to lay this on the table, that if a military government could go through that process of robust conversations and even take a position to say, oh no, we're no longer interested in the loan because Nigerians say they don't want it. Forget about the fact that they went through the back door and still introduced the same policy they wanted to have done because the policies were inspired by the IMF and the World Bank. And we went through it. And since then, we have gone through different phases of deepening that neoliberal reform that we ignited in 1986. So the language of how the imperative of it, why we don't have alternative, it's the same. All over, through our history, it's been the same line of argument. And the argument that, okay, look, he gave us a medical approach to this. We can't remove bandages every day. But I also know that in medicine, you don't also provide medication on once and for all basis. That is why you have dosage. They say take 2 in the morning, take 2 in the afternoon, take 2 tablets in the evening. Because they recognize in that medical terms that once you overdose, it's a problem. And the challenge we are dealing with today is the overdose. And it is this overdose that is killing people. Look, I'm a political economist. I don't have problem with all the details in terms of the macroeconomic necessity and the stress that informed that. But I have a problem with spontaneity in decision making. That the government can wake up on the day that the president is being sworn in and declare that we have removed subsidy and then we are liberalizing the foreign exchange. That, for me, yes, he could have the political capital at that moment, and therefore it is important to do it. But you see, capital, like anything, you gain it, you lose it. That's what it is. You may have it at that moment of decision making, but you can lose it through that simple pronouncement, and therefore makes implementation extremely difficult. And that's the issue. So for us, and for a country that was already stressed, because all the failures of the central bank, I accept those things happen. Everybody knows this. All the crises that happened under the past government, it was very clear. But it wasn't the citizens of this country that caused the problem. It was governments. It was government's problem. So why are you punishing me for what the government failed? Because government is government. You are government, the past ones are government. So why are you punishing us for what for government's own failure? For what they ought to have done rightly and are not doing it. Your corrective measures are necessary. They are important, and I don't want to question it. But how we carried out those corrective measures are the key concern. One, you live in a country where over 130 million people live under multidimensional poverty. Then, you are also in a country that is highly import dependent. So, first instance, you remove subsidy without any safeguard. It is the first time this was done in the history of this country. I don't want to say the previous safeguards were excellent. They weren't. There were problems, there were challenges with them, but there was a pretension that we actually want to have certain safeguards. There was no safeguard, and that's what informed the differential implementations that you see. You gave an example of Kaduna, you gave an example of Rivers. That's what informs those differences, because there is no coherent safeguard. It is only in Nigeria that we talk about social protection post-mortem. That you have the shock before you put up social protection. The social protection that I do, that I understand, that I've engaged with globally, is basically a mechanism that you put in place to avoid shocks. You don't do that or shock. And this is not about this government. Even previous government have done it that same way. It's not, so I'm not saying it's this government. Even previous government, that's what they do. You create the shock, and then post-mortem, then you now say, we are providing relief, we are cushioning it. So I think this is the social part, is the politics of it. Because many times, we think reforms are technocratic processes. So we go through this over-technicization of reforms. But reforms are about people. They are about society. And that is why the involvement of people is very important. But we have reached a stage in this country where we think that people have become obstacles. The people are obstacles. If you listen to them, then you're not going to do anything. That's the dimension, and that's what informs this kind of thing. Or if you listen to labor union, they can be obstructive. And I agree to some extent. Because again, the labor union also didn't take through the thought processes that are required to engage. They are my friends. And I know I disagree on so many fronts in some of our conversation. Civil society, yes, You may have your own understanding. You may think that they are quite obstructive, and I agree. Because we are all layered in the society to perform different roles. And each of us, as we perform our roles, we become obstructive to each other. And that is why social negotiations are very important. Government, the way it does its things affects me. The way civil society do their things affects government, the way labor. So, and that is why conversations are always important for you to find. Because the challenge of reform is not the decision. The challenge of reform is sustaining it. And this is the history that we have had, and that is why we couldn't get through with any reform. I tell you, today we have these stories about how bad it was and what we have changed. I've lived in this country all my life, even when I was doing international job. I operate from here. I've studied this country. The longest you will have of this government is 8 years. Another person will come back and will be told how bad it was and why we need to do this. So for me, and I think that sometimes, because if you roll out all the gains, the macroeconomic stability that we talk about, despite the micro shocks that we have, that was shared with us earlier, and that we all know, the foreign investors that are coming into the country, fantastic. But many times our policies, particularly in the economic front, are designed to secure validation from somewhere else. Is World Bank happy with us? Is the IMF happy with us? When we go to spring meetings, how many people are coming to us? These are the kind of validations that sometimes we go seeking, because we live in a world that is so deeply divided. The northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. At all time, we are looking for validation, even in my own space. So I am not talking about economic, even at the level of civil society. Sometimes we seek validation from the northern world, unfortunately. And this is what happens in this regard. So when investors troop in, my basic economics also tells me that there is an incentive. There is something attractive, because capital, the whole essence of capital is profit. And it will go anywhere to make profit. It will go to Iraq under war, it is in Sudan, it's still making profit. As long as profit can be made, capital will go there. And so, if the investors are coming, there must be incentive. There is something attracting them. Could it also be that we have subsidized the poor and subsidizing the rich, and that is why they are coming, and that's why they are making profit? I hope it gets. We live in a country where we speak from both sides of our mouth, and so in one breath, Nigerians, we want a proper federal system. They want to have a very empowered state government, more resources to state government. In another breath, we don't trust the state authorities. We don't trust local government. We think the federal government is much more trustworthy, and therefore we want to see federal government doing certain things. And that can be very problematic for policymakers, particularly at the center. For me, for instance, I have questioned in several ways why a member of the National Assembly will take resources from the center constituency project and go and build primary schools, put street lights, build toilet, fence cemeteries and graveyards. And that is not the responsibility of the federal government. You are in the federal parliament. So it's like you are stealing from the federal government to do local government and state government responsibility. The same way some of us were very critical of the role that the central bank was playing, where the central bank, like the teacher described, was practically every ministry that you can think about, providing different forms of interventions everywhere. And through that process, helping themselves to resources that are actually meant for ordinary people. I'm happy to hear that has stopped, and that's quite encouraging. But when it comes to issues bordering on social protection, we actually think that there can be a standard national framework that is institutionalized. It may not, and I agree, the central government may not have the capacity to, meaning technical capacity and the human resource to go into that. I think the state government should be doing it, the local government should be doing it. In all of my experience around the world, it's done at that level. But there is a national framework that defines it, so that Kaduna will not do it and Rivers fails to do, or Kano does it and Niger refused to do. There has to be that national framework. Because we don't have it, what we are getting from the state government is that more resources have come to them. It's more money in their pocket. And what do they do with it? Overhead bridges, airports, and some of those egocentric projects, and they will end up becoming white elephants that have no value to the people. Okay, take for instance, Zamfara State is building an airport. Zamfara is about 200 kilometers from Sokoto. Jigawa has an airport in Dutse. That airport, I am not sure any, apart from chartered plane, I'm not sure any commercial plane had landed there. It's about 12 years since the construction. Bauchi has an airport. Gombe has an airport. How many planes goes to Bauchi? So you have some of those things, and that's what they do. You go to any state capital today, what you see is overhead bridge, underpasses, because development has been defined that your capital city must look like Abuja. Then when you have that, then you are now a developed state. Your state is fine. Forget about the fact that it also creates opportunities for other things. I think that will be my first call, that let's institutionalize our social protection program. Let's be very systematic about it. Let's support state government. I mean, when I say let's, the federal government, support state government to build out mechanisms. And can we also be able to say what percentage of our resources are we investing in social protection? That will really, really help. And that we will not be doing post-mortem. We'll be continuing. And people cannot be on social protection forever. People graduate and new people fall in because it's more like a shock absorber kind of thing. The second part for me is our policy should be socially aware. And let me give you an instance. In this country, only 7% of us are formally employed, according to Nigeria's labor survey. 93% of employed Nigerians are in the informal sector. 93. So when you make policies that have to do with salaries, you are probably dealing with, or minimum wage and all that, you're probably dealing with that 7%. And the 93% that is in the informal space, and we know when we say that space is informal, it comes with a number of difficulties, including assessment. And therefore, interventions that we do must take strong cognizance of the character of our economy. The third for me is, look, macroeconomic stability is good, and I don't want to question that in any way. We all want to see GDP growth and all that. And I commend those who are involved in this process of arriving at where we probably are at this moment. But experience also tells me that it is not enough for a stable society. And that areas and countries around the world where they've been able to deal with poverty, they were able to create a deliberate process of working hand in hand between stabilizing the economy and ensuring that people live decently. And I don't want to start mentioning countries. The Chinese experience is massive. and the role of the state remains very important. What kills some of us in technocratic fixes is the belief that the private sector is important or more important than the state. And therefore, what the state needs to do is to provide the right framework for them to operate, and therefore things will work well, and then it will begin to percolate, and the poor will benefit, probably in his graves or so. And for me, it doesn't work, and it never worked. It never worked. Across Africa, I have seen examples of many. Ghana was one time celebrated as an example of stable economy. And when we were resisting all the structural adjustment program in those days, Ghana was often given to us as an example. Ivory Coast before the Civil War we were told is one of the most stable. And it became an example for every African country. At the point, Kenya, and today is still an example. But I walk in some of those places and you get the narratives around it. And this is why I took a personal decision that I will not comment on any country, whether the economy is doing well or not, whether it is Burkina Faso that you hear every day. Or not, but I want to hear directly from the citizens, because sometimes what we get, the documentation, the analysis we get from the World Bank does not reflect, and the African Development Bank does not reflect the realities of the people. Because the World Bank, the African Development Bank, they have their standard framework for understanding economies. And the reporting and analysis are based on those bases. And that does not speak to the contextual issues of those countries, and we don't get the right call. So for me, and lastly, I think our population is massive as a country. And our economy must go along that line. We have a youthful population, and what we always say is that if we invest in them, they become asset to the country. We don't invest, they become liability to the country. There are lots that we can do to support that. Social development is very key. Health and education. I know we talk about agri all the time, and I like the idea of investing in agriculture. But health and education remains very key. That's not the job for the central bank per se. Madam, it's key, and we need to find the way of doing it. Fortunately and unfortunately for us, by the nature of our constitution, is a concurrent responsibility. The states play and local government plays very important role. That's my space. But I know what the challenges are at the state and the local government level. What do we do? What can we do as a country? Because if we don't deal with our education and health crisis, I'm sorry, we cannot even improve the economy in a sustained manner. Because economy is about sustainability. It's not an episodic issue that you do today, because this is how we've been doing it. We do it, we fix this today, tomorrow we tweak, the next day we go. If we can't sustain it, even though I don't talk sustainability the way the World Bank says it, in one of its report, it says that we must keep these changes for the next 15 to 20 years, then we will now begin to see how it will impact. I don't want to die before I say improvement. Thank you very much.